Hey Optimancers, Chris here. I've been releasing a series where I go over the spell options available to Druids. The Druid spell list is one I find often oversimplified or underrated, so I hope to highlight the really great spell options available to this class. So far I've done analysis for Druid cantrips and first and second level spells, and today I'm going to be going over our third level spell options. We've had some really good spells already, but like with every full spellcaster in the game, things really ramp up when we get to third level spells. The spells Aura of Vitality, Elemental Weapon, and Revivify were added to the Druid spell list as optional class features in Tasha's, so I will be reviewing these spells, but if you aren't using the optional class features from Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, you should note that these spells won't be available for your Druid. Hey, if you like the content here, consider supporting me through Patreon. Patrons of this channel get to see these videos early and non-monetized, and my top level patrons can join me and play some D&D every month. Check out the link in the video description if you're interested. Today I want to recognize these top level supporters: Ken Livingston, Kurt G, IGW, Loxodon13, Math Guy Dave, Matt, Mouse the Tank, Mikhail Precursor, Nathaniel McCauley, and Nick Lutz. Thank you all so much for your support. Let's get started. I'm going to be ranking every spell using my standard rating system. Here's how that works. If I rank a spell as red, I think it's a bad spell, and I wouldn't recommend it for preparation on basically any druid. If I rank a spell as orange, I think it's a very circumstantial spell. This is a spell I wouldn't recommend to prepare normally, but there are situations where it will come in handy. And if we know those situations are likely to present themselves, in those cases these spells can be very effective. If I rank a spell as purple, I think the spell is okay. They're likely not the first spells I'm personally going to prepare, or at least as my primary selections, but I do think you can get reasonable value from them if you do prepare them. If I rank a spell as green, I think it's a good spell. This is the kind of spell I would consider very strongly when choosing my spell preparations. This isn't necessarily a must-have, but if you do prepare it, you're likely going to get the chance to use it, and you should get good value from it. If I rank a spell as blue, then I think it's a fantastic spell. I would have a hard time passing up the chance to prepare a blue spell. These spells are the best of the best. If you're colorblind, I'll be adding stars to the end of each rating: 1 for red, 2 for orange, 3 for purple, 4 for green, and 5 for blue, so it should be easy to discern the color ranking. And if you're just listening, no problem. I'll be announcing each rating as well. First up is Aura of Vitality. This spell takes an action to cast and lasts up to a minute using your concentration. While this spell is active, you can use a bonus action on each of your turns, including the turn you cast the spell, to heal one creature within 30 feet of you for 2d6 hit points. That's about 7 hit points on average. So I do question whether using your concentration and your bonus actions to deliver 7 points of healing in combat is going to be a good tactic most of the time. But out of combat, this is 70 hit points worth of healing with a third level spell. And it's not 70 hit points of healing like to one creature, because you can distribute it to the party members that need it. So if we consider our average 5th level character is probably maybe around 40 hit points maximum, you could heal 3 party members at half hit points to full and still have some left over. That isn't bad at all. So as an in-combat concentration spell, I think this is pretty iffy. But out of combat, as a fairly quick recovery spell, I think it is pretty solid. If we had regular good berries, then we're talking about 7 castings to equal this. So I think this earns a green ranking. It's a good spell. You do have other options though, but this is a good option. Next spell is Call Lightning. This spell is an action to cast and can last up to 10 minutes using your concentration. You create a storm cloud with a 60-foot radius and 10 feet high, so that's 120 feet across. So let's face it, that's almost the entire battlefield in almost every case. But here's the kicker. If that 60-foot radius cloud isn't going to fit in a room, then the spell fails. So if you're indoors, you're going to be out of luck almost all the time, unless that is one big room. You pick a spot under the cloud where lightning flashes down, so on a grid that's an intersection of squares, and each creature within 5 feet of that point makes a dexterity saving throw. So we're talking about 4 squares. They take 3d10 lightning damage on a failed save, or half that on a successful one. On each of your turns, while the spell lasts, you can use your action again to do this, choosing either the same point you did last time, or you can choose a different point as long as it's under that huge cloud. Now, if you cast this outside during a storm, instead you gain control of the storm cloud. Now, what the spell doesn't specify is this. Let's say the cloud is several miles across. Is your area of effect the entire cloud? The way I read it, I think so, but that may be up to DM interpretation. I do think in most cases, it really isn't going to make much of a difference, to be honest. Your entire battlefield is going to be covered either way, and it's probably not covering your next battlefield. I mean, maybe, but probably not. But if we cast this on an existing storm cloud, one thing is clear. The damage increases by a d10 per lightning strike, so it does a 4d10 damage bolt each time. We can upcast this spell, and if we do so, the damage increases by a d10 for each additional spell level. So, this spell actually sounds okay, honestly, but when I evaluate spells and I analyze them, I like to look at other spells that do similar things, and then I compare the numbers. And when I do that, suddenly this spell doesn't look very good anymore. So here is Moonbeam. I went over this spell in my last video. This is a 2nd level Druid spell, and we can see it covers the same amount of area as each bolt of lightning, 4 squares. And the damage is only 2d10, but look at the scaling. If I cast Moonbeam with the same 3rd level spell slot I might have cast Call Lightning with, then it's 3d10, the same damage as Call Lightning. The damage type is Radiant, which is more reliable. The spell doesn't have to be cast outdoors, but you certainly can cast it outdoors. And it does the damage without using your action. Though it is not unlikely you're going to need your action to move it anyways, but even then, you can move it 60 feet with your action, which is likely more than you need to get it where you wanted it. You could also technically move it 600 feet over the duration, well beyond the 60-foot radius of a Call Lightning storm. Also, since the aura persists rather than being called down each round, you can also benefit from moving enemies into the area. So they take the damage when they enter, and again at the start of their turn, potentially doubling the damage. Now, there are some advantages to doing Call Lightning instead. If you cast it during a storm, it does that d10 extra damage, and targeting Dexterity is better than targeting Constitution. And it does have a 10-minute duration. But here's the thing, you're not moving the cloud, so unless it's a really, really long battle, that extra duration doesn't do much for you. So overall, I would say Moonbeam almost completely trumps Call Lightning. Because of the possibility of damage twice per round, you probably outdamage Call Lightning even during a storm. You can cast it anywhere. You may not need to use your action every turn to do the damage. And this is a lower level spell. It shouldn't be as good as this scaled up, but honestly, to me it seems even better. So Call Lightning is just not a spell I recommend, generally. I mean, let's say you're doing like a Helm's Deep type of battle, then that duration may come into play. So for that reason, I'm going to squeak it into orange. It's, bordering on red. But overall, I would say just take Moonbeam. And if you want to use a 3rd level spell slot on this kind of effect, then upcast Moonbeam. I think it's going to serve you better 90% of the time. Up next, Conjure Animals. This spell is actually the main reason why I wanted to do this series. Not because I wanted to highlight this very good spell, but because I wanted to highlight that there's a whole lot to the Druid spell list beyond this spell. Because I absolutely do hear this, that this is the only reason to play a Druid, and if this spell wasn't allowed because, it's not uncommon for a DM to limit spells that drag out gameplay, and this is certainly a spell that does that, then there would be no reason to play a Druid over any other caster, which frankly I think is absurd. Druids have a plethora of great options, a lot of them unique to Druids among full spellcasters. We've seen some already. But is this spell good? Oh yes, this spell is super powerful. It takes an action to cast, and you choose whether to summon 1 beast of challenge rating 2 or lower, 2 beasts of challenge rating 1 or lower, 4 beasts of challenge rating half or lower, or 8 beasts of challenge rating quarter or lower. Now the DM picks what beasts are summoned, and I'll say that one again. The DM picks what beasts are summoned, and then you can place them wherever you like in unoccupied spaces within 60 feet of you. Then you roll for initiative for the beasts, and they're placed in the turn order. Then for 1 hour, or until you lose concentration, the beasts follow your verbal commands. This doesn't require any action by you, and if you don't issue any commands, they take no action beyond defending themselves from attackers. If you upcast a spell, you gain twice as many creatures if you use a 5th level slot, 3 times as many with a 7th level slot, or 4 times as many with a 9th level slot. So I should start off that summoning has all kinds of uses. Summoning is more than just the damage that summoned creatures can inflict. They can eat up enemy attacks, block movement, or take other actions besides attacking. Also, some kinds of beasts do get special attacks, like spiders have a ranged restraining web, for example. So if we are to compare this to the other summoning spells, this one really shines when you select more beasts with the lower challenge rating. 8 additional creatures in a fight is insane for the action economy. And even if you just have them all attack, assuming the DM doesn't screw you by selecting a lower challenge rating creature, which technically they can do by the wording of the spell, but my general assumption would be they won't, then the damage you can put together with this alone is a ton of damage, even ignoring the other advantages of summoned creatures. Now, variance in hit points of the creatures can swing pretty massively. For example, let's say you select the 8 creatures, and even if the DM selects 1/4 challenge rating beasts, you could have 4 hit points per creature if they select giant centipedes, or 22 hit points per creature if they select giant bats. So there is a pretty significant random variance there. One of the limitations of this spell versus the newer summoning spells is that instead of going right after you, they roll their own initiative, and this can be inconvenient as well. But honestly, these limitations are small potatoes compared to the advantages here. This can just swing the action economy so dramatically, there's just no denying this spell is a standout. There's flexibility here too, since if space is an issue, you still do have the option to select fewer higher challenge rating beasts. Though I will say, generally speaking, more beasts is for the most part going to be more potent. The single highest challenge rating summon is the least impressive option here. But still, even then, it's summoning, which is good. And the CR2 creature list could get you as many as 60 hit points on a single creature. Now I should point out, the attacks of these creatures are not considered magical. So if straight damage is your goal, resistances or even immunity could be a factor, and it is more likely to be a factor as you increase in levels. But this spell is blue. This is a fantastic spell. There's no denying it. Is it the only fantastic spell Druids get? Not remotely. You just have to not look to think that this is the only fantastic spell Druids get, or even the only reason to play a Druid. You just have to not look, or just put on your blinders. But this is a great spell. It is easily blue. The next spell is Daylight. So what you do is you use your action and you choose a spot within 60 feet of you, and then a sphere of bright light with a 60-foot radius appears, and then extends out another 60-foot radius in dim light. Alternatively, you can cast this on an object, and then the object sheds the same amount of light, but if the object moves, the light moves with it, and if the object is covered, then the light can be blocked. The light continues for 1 hour with no concentration, and if during the duration it comes into contact with magical darkness created by a spell of 3rd level or lower, then that spell is dispelled. So, do you need a 3rd level spell to create light? No, you don't even need a spell to do that. And for the most part, a lantern provides you plenty of light. The light cantrip even creates enough light for most circumstances. Also, this is really weird, but this light is not treated as sunlight, even though the spell is literally called daylight. So creatures with sunlight sensitivity are not hindered by this spell. And I think that really would have made this spell a lot more viable without being overpowered, but with that limitation, it's just light. I mean, I think this ends up being red because you get light, which you could do with a 5 gold piece item. And then on top of that, you get an absolutely, ridiculously limited dispel magic that only works on spells that create darkness. And speaking of which, up next is dispel magic. This is a one-action casting, and you choose an object, creature, or magical effect within 120 feet, and if that target is affected by a spell, or is a spell effect of 3rd level or lower, then the spell ends. If it's affected by a spell of higher level, then you make an ability check using your wisdom if you're a druid, which I'm assuming you are for this particular list, with a DC of 10 plus the spell's level. And if you succeed on the check, the spell ends. If it's affected by multiple spells, all spells are subject to the dispel magic. Now, one thing I should say here is that according to the designers, quote unquote, the spell ends doesn't mean what it says. What it actually means is the spell ends on that target, and if the target is a spell effect, then it may not be one target. And let me explain. So let's say you have 3 party members affected by a fear spell, and you cast dispel magic. So you pick one of those party members, and the spell ends on them, but it persists on the other 2. And you know what? I get that. Here's what I don't get. If the opposing druid casts conjure animals and there's 8 creatures, you cast this spell and you can dispel one of those 8. I think that's a pretty strange ruling actually, because it ends up creating a lot of confusion. Let's say somebody casts entangle. Can I dispel it? Or can I dispel the growth of a single plant? Based on their ruling, now it's not really clear. Is the entire spell a magical effect, or many magical effects? I would have thought a single magical effect, but again, I would have thought conjure animals is a single magical effect too, so I have no idea. Now you can upcast this spell, and if you do, you automatically dispel the effects of a spell on a target up to the spell level you used. So despite the confusion, I still do think dispel magic is a good spell. I think most DMs aren't going to have this spell cast on an Ever's Black Tentacles dispel a single tentacle, or I would hope not. This can be used to remove buffs on an enemy, debuffs on an ally, or remove spell effects on a battlefield, which is really quite good. Obviously, not every combat involves enemies casting spells, but when they do, this is invaluable. So I think it's a solid green. Our next spell is Elemental Weapon. This spell requires an action to cast, and you touch a non-magical weapon, which becomes magical for up to 1 hour using your concentration. The weapon gains a +1 bonus to hit and damage rolls, and it deals an extra d4 of a damage type you select when you cast a spell, and that could be acid, cold, fire, or lightning. You can upcast a spell, and then you increase the bonus to hit and damage, as well as adding additional d4s of the type chosen. If you use a 5th level slot, it's +2 and 2d4, and with a 7th level slot, it's +3 and 3d4. Now this spell, like the magic weapon spell for some other classes, could potentially be invaluable, because if you're stuck with a non-magical weapon, and then you're facing resistances or immunities, this can allow you to bypass those. Also, there's a straight buff here, because you are increasing to hit rolls and the damage. One thing that I think is a real problem here is that it can't be cast on, and therefore can't combine, with an existing magical weapon. So you're giving up that magical bonus and replacing it with this one, assuming you have a non-magical weapon of the same type to cast this on. That means this often ends up being a pretty minor buff. Maybe not even a buff at all, depending what that magic weapon is. This is also a 3rd level spell using your concentration, so we're not investing a small amount here. Also, unlike the lower level magic weapon spell, as an emergency buff in combat, this one is an action to cast instead of a bonus action. So it's a bigger action investment as well, though depending if you have a strong bonus action already, that might not be a big deal. So if you have a weapon user in your party that doesn't have a magic weapon, and then you're attacked by, I don't know, werewolves, well then this is worth casting. But as a straight buff, I don't think it's very good in most games. I think this ranks orange because there is that once in a while case where it can be good. And context is important here because druids don't have the magic weapon spell. I think if they did, I would rank this red and tell you to just take that instead. But they don't, so it's orange. But if somebody else has magic weapon as a spell, then you really don't need this. Erupting Earth is up next. This is an action to cast, and you pick a point on the ground you can see within 120 feet. A 20-foot cube centered on that point appeared. Now that's not a radius, that's 20 feet across. Each creature in the area makes a dexterity saving throw, taking 3d12 bludgeoning damage on a failed save, or half of that on a successful save. Then the ground in the area becomes difficult terrain. We can upcast this spell, inflicting an additional d12 damage with each slot level we increase. Now, druids do not get a lot of non-concentration blast spells, or at least they don't get the better ones, because this one is not good. This spell is the same level as Fireball, but it does quite a bit less damage, like 20 average compared to 28 for Fireball. And the area, by the way, is like way, way smaller. So you will likely hit less targets too. And yes, we're scaling with D12s, but scaling single action blast spells is pretty bad, regardless of the die type honestly. I explain why in the video that I'm going to link above. I guess you get some difficult terrain, but it's not a big area of difficult terrain, and you probably place this to get as many targets as possible, not necessarily the best spot for difficult terrain. And if you want difficult terrain, we can do a lot better than this. So overall, I just don't think this is a good spell. The damage isn't high enough, and the area is too small. But I did say that druids don't get the best options for this kind of spell. And druids do end up concentrating. I mean, they are pretty much concentrating all the time. So sometimes you are just looking for a spell to cast with your action that isn't breaking your concentration. And Fireball's not an option. So on that occasion, I could see it. So for druids, I think this is orange. Next spell is Feign Death. You can either use an action to cast this spell, or 10 minutes to cast it as a ritual. You touch a willing creature and it appears dead for 1 hour. Basically, it is kind of dead. It can't move or see or take actions. I guess it can hear. It can also be damaged, though it does get resistance to almost all kinds of damage. Now I can come up with some possible situations where this could be used. Here's one. You cast this so an overwhelming enemy force assumes you're dead and they don't kill you. Here's another. You cast this when there's already a bunch of dead bodies in a room, and when an enemy you want to spy on enters the room and discusses their evil plans, you can overhear them unnoticed. Now, if those sound so circumstantial, this shouldn't even get an orange rating, then I agree with you. This one is red. Our next spell is Flame Arrows. You cast this with your action and touch a quiver containing arrows or bolts. For up to an hour, using your concentration, any target hit with those arrows or bolts takes an additional d6 fire damage. The spell ends earlier once 12 pieces of ammunition are drawn from the quiver. So let's say you cast this on the archer's crossbow bolts. Now even if you don't have a super optimized archer, 3 per round, not hard to achieve. So we're tearing through these fast, like 4 rounds and it is over. And the total damage, well, let's say 60% of the attacks hit. Then we're talking about 25 points of damage total to single targets over multiple rounds using your concentration. I mean, that's just not good. This is red. It's the 12 arrows total that ruins this. Even though without that limit, I don't think it would be a great spell. Next up, Meld into Stone. You cast this using your action, and you use your movement to step into a stone object or surface, and you completely immerse yourself in the stone. So basically, you completely disappear. Well merged, you can't see outside the stone, and you have disadvantage to hear anything. If you cast spells, you can cast them, but they have to be cast on yourself, and you can't move unless you end the spell by leaving the stone early. Otherwise, you can stay in the stone for up to 8 hours. If the stone is partially destroyed or its shape is changed so that you no longer fit in it, then you're expelled, you fall prone, and you take 66 bludgeoning damage. If the stone is completely destroyed or turned into another substance, you take 50 damage and you're expelled and fall prone. So I think the utility here is relatively clear. Just for hiding, this is pretty good. But I should also note this doesn't use concentration, so you could potentially use this to protect yourself while you're concentrating on another spell. Pretty expensive method of maintaining concentration though. This is a 3rd level spell. I think though this can be occasionally useful, either as a method to prevent dropping in combat if you're low hit points, or the aforementioned utility. So I think this is an orange rated spell. Our next spell is Plant Growth. You can cast this in 2 possible ways. The first is you cast a spell using your action, and all normal plants in a 100-foot radius. Yeah, you heard that right. 100-foot radius of a point you select within 150 feet become overgrown. Though actually not, because you can choose to exclude any areas of any size you like. So this spell actually should read that you cast a spell using your action, and any normal plants you wish in a 100-foot radius become thick and overgrown. And a creature moving through the area, get this, has to spend 4 feet of movement for every foot it moves. So basically, moving through one single square requires 20 feet of movement. And this isn't defined as difficult terrain, so if you did, say, throw some difficult terrain down, the penalty here would double. Or you can cast a spell over 8 hours, and basically you improve the harvest. Let's ignore that part of the spell and go back to the insanity. So first off, you need plants. So there's that. This isn't going to be useful in a dungeon. But let's say you're on the grass. Well, then you are golden. So before I get into a tactical situation here, I should mention this spell is not concentration. In fact, it's not a duration spell at all, meaning immediately when you cast a spell, this is no longer a magical effect, and it can't be dispelled, and lasts, until the plants die, I guess. There's only one way to temporarily remove the effect I'm aware of, and we're actually going to be getting into that later on this list. So how good is this on the battlefield? It's crazy good. Again, if you have the right terrain, but if you have it, as far as battlefield controls go, this is pretty much unmatched. And again, essentially instant and permanent. So let's look at a battle map and let me show you how good this is. So here's our battle map and our druid is right here. Now, in this case, we're saying maybe we got attacked by a bunch of demons. So these demons are here and they're going to be rushing us. These are Belguras, by the way. In this particular case, we're talking about a large demon with a 40-foot speed, and it has a pretty substantial multi-attack. So this bright green area, we might cast Plant Growth right there. And if we did that, then we'd have these 2 Belguras on the right side being able to move right into combat with us, and they would essentially be separated from the rest of the group. These Belguras over here close to the edge could probably get through in a couple rounds. But once we get deeper in, it could take a long time. This guy here, for example, 20 feet of movement, 40, 60, 80, 100, 120, 140, 160, 180, 185 movement to get out of the effect. And this is on a relatively small battlefield. The area here I've covered is like a quarter of what a plant growth can actually cover. But the idea is if you were to do a divide and conquer, then you could take on the 2 that are outside first. Then as they trickle out of the plant growth, you take them on, a couple rounds later and then a couple rounds after that. But because of the way plant growth works, we can do a lot better than this. Because what if when we cast plant growth, we made it look like this instead? Because we can do this. We can exclude any areas we want. So let's say we do it like this. Well, now, no matter where any of these Belguras move, they're automatically in the area of some of the plant growth. So they will always have the debilitating movement penalty. But us and our other medium or small party members can move through freely. We can even move diagonally. No problem at all. We can go pretty much wherever we want without any hindrance. Then we can go up and take on these creatures one at a time. No problem at all. They're not moving. We are. No saving throw. No concentration. It just works. That is how good this spell can be. So in the end, this is circumstantial. But you know what? It is so good in that circumstance. I think I have to give this green or blue. You know what? It is plant growth, so I think green is the obvious choice. Next spell, Protection from Energy. You cast this using your action, and the creature you touch gains resistance to acid, cold, fire, lightning, or thunder as long as you maintain concentration up to 1 hour. So here's the thing. Absorb Elements exists. It's a first level spell. It can give you resistance to any of those damage types. It uses just your reaction after you take the damage, so you don't cast it unless you need it, and it doesn't use your concentration, and it is a first level spell. Not to say there aren't any advantages here. We can cast this on somebody else, and it can last a lot longer if we can maintain our concentration. But still, concentration has to be cast beforehand, and this is a third level spell. These are some very hefty downsides. But you know what? Let's say you're entering the Red Dragon lair, and you cast this on Bob the Fighter, who doesn't have Absorb Elements, and then you can use Absorb Elements on yourself. Then you can drop this and cast another concentration spell after that pretty much guaranteed first round breath attack, and then this is, okay. So I think this gets orange, but it is not a strong orange. And seriously, just tell Bob to dip a casting class and pick up Absorb Elements, darn it. Revivify is our next spell. We cast this using our action and we touch a dead creature, expend a 300 gold piece material component, and if that creature died within the last minute, it's restored to life with 1 hit point. And that's it. There are a lot of spells in the game that bring back the dead, but this is the lowest level version, and frankly, it's almost always better than those higher level versions anyways. Raise Dead is 5th level, and it requires an hour to cast, uses a more expensive material component, and gives the target a lingering -4 penalty to pretty much every roll it makes. Even True Resurrection, which is a 9th level spell, still requires an hour to cast, and the material component for that one requires 25,000 gold. The disadvantage of this spell is the limit of being dead for 1 minute. But seriously, if you have the spell prepared when you need it, and you have the component ready when you need it, then if we're talking about reviving a PC, that minute is plenty of time. Now technically there is a real advantage to Raise Dead in that you don't need to prepare it, because you can prepare it the next day after we know we need it. So fair enough, but still, this is a good spell. Now, ideally, you don't need to raise anyone, but if we do, this is a good way to do it. You can raise someone while the battle's still going, and then they can jump right back in the action. Though a light tap is going to drop them again, but it probably won't kill them, so this can still be good even for that. Honestly, at some point, you would probably want to have a Raise Dead option, and this, if you can afford the preparation slot, is the best one to have on hand. So, it is a green rank. I recommend this spell on your Druid. Now, Clerics of 9th level have the option of preparing Raise Dead the next day, like I just discussed about, and that would do the trick, and then they can save the preparation slot. But with Druids, we only have Reincarnate as an option at that point, which, might do the trick, but there is a random element that a player who likes their current race may not be keen on. Next up is Sleet Storm. We use an action and choose a point within 150 feet in a 40-foot radius, so 80 feet across. Cylinder rises 20 feet, and the entire area becomes heavily obscured. All flames are doused, the area becomes difficult terrain, and a creature in the area at the start of their turn, or if it moves into the area on any turn, has to make a dexterity saving throw or fall prone. Spellcasters in the area that start their turn in the area make concentration saving throws against your spell DC if they're concentrating on a spell, or they lose concentration. The effect lasts for your concentration up to 1 minute. So this is good stuff. This is a great battlefield control. The area is huge, you block sight, there's double impairment to movement because it's not only difficult terrain, but creatures are falling prone as well. So they use half their movement to get up, and now they're facing difficult terrain. As a divide and conquer method for groups of enemies, this works very well. And also, because sight is obscured, a lot of creatures that even have teleports need to see where they're going so they won't be able to use them. This is also one of the better ways to drop enemy concentration, and the DC is likely going to be higher than 1 for inflicting damage. Remember, this is also like a fog cloud by restricting sight, even dark vision, devil sight, it even blocks true sight. This is also one of those effects that combines well with force movement because the prone effect occurs when you push an enemy into the area. Now, let me talk a little bit about the bad stuff. Did I mention this was big? Because it is really big. So let's say you're in a pretty big room. 40 feet across big. If you cast this spell, guess what? You're in the area. So hard fail. Remember too, this is battlefield control. We're not damaging anyone yet, so we still need to do that. But as far as battlefield controls go, this is a really good spell. Sometimes it's just too big. But if you have the room for it, this works very well. So it's green. It's just because sometimes this spell is too big. Otherwise it would be blue. Our next spell is Speak with Plants. So you cast this spell using your action, and it's really strange to me this isn't a ritual spell. It seems like it should be a ritual spell. But you cast it using your action, and plants within 30 feet of you gain limited sentience, and you can talk to them. After that, this is a lot like the first level ritual spell, Speak with Animals, except it's plants. And you spent a 3rd level spell slot. Generally, this is used the same way as Speak with Animals. So you ask the plants, what's been going on? Did the bad guys come by? Which way did they go? That kind of thing. But I guess if you could find some kind of place that has plants but no animals, then this is your only option for that kind of spell. But I would think most places with plants have some kind of animals too. In which case you can get that same information with the first level spell. And not even that if you cast it as a ritual. We can also have the plants turn the area into difficult terrain. But like with Erupting Earth, some difficult terrain for a 3rd level spell slot seems pretty lame actually. Cast plant growth, and you'll do much, much worse than difficult terrain. There's also one aspect to the spell that I think is seriously too circumstantial to make it something I would recommend, but I will mention that we can use this to interfere with a couple other Druid spells. We can have plants in an entangle spell release a creature they're restraining, or this is the way I referred to that we can, for 10 minutes, turn plants affected by plant growth into ordinary terrain. Now, technically the designers made a boo-boo here because the wording is that difficult terrain caused by plant growth becomes ordinary terrain, except plant growth technically isn't difficult terrain. So if you want to be a rules lawyer, this doesn't work. But I think we know how it's supposed to work. But this is only 30 feet, and plant growth is massive, so keep that in mind. There's just not enough here. This should obviously be a ritual, right? But it's not, and that's why I need to give it red. Next up is Summon Fey. We use an action and we summon a small Fey creature in an unoccupied space within 90 feet. The creature remains summoned until it drops to 0 hit points, or up to 1 hour using our concentration. When we cast a spell, we choose one of 3 types of Fey spirits to summon. All of them have a short sword attack, 30 hit points, a 15 armor class, 40 feet movement, immunity to charm, and dark vision. Depending on the type we choose, they all get a bonus action that gives them a 30-foot teleport, and it either gains advantage on its next attack roll on the turn, forces a creature to make a wisdom saving throw or be charmed by both of you for up to 1 minute, or creates a 5-foot cube of darkness within 5 feet of it that lasts until the end of its next turn. When you cast this, you don't roll initiative for the creature. The Fey automatically takes its turn immediately after you. Starting on the turn you cast a spell, and it follows your verbal commands with no action required by you. If you don't command it, it dodges. You can upcast a spell, increasing the number of attacks, armor class, hit points, and the damage of its attacks. So, on its own, this is a good spell. But I think the question is, in fact, I know the question is because I've been asked it multiple times, if conjure animals exists, why would I ever cast summon Fae? And I think there's a fair point in that question somewhere, because conjure animals is a fantastic spell. But I do think that question does have an answer. In fact, I think it has several answers. First, initiative. There is a tactical advantage to having this act immediately after you cast it. Think of it like automatically winning initiative. It also helps coordinate actions on following rounds. Second, the mobility. The Fae can teleport every turn as a bonus action, plus it has a good base movement speed. With conjure animals, you don't know what you're going to get. Third, the rider to the teleport. Maybe it's just magical darkness that blocks sight of enemies right after your turn. Maybe it's preventing enemy attacks through charm. Fourth, the damage type. The Fae Spirit inflicts force damage with every hit, and it uses a short sword. So presumably, if you have a magic short sword, you could hand it off to the Fae, and now all its damage is reliable. Fifth, you know what you're going to get. The DM isn't picking the creature with this spell. This allows us to plan and take best advantage of the type of Fae we're going to summon. And sixth, and maybe most importantly, this spell is just more seamless at the table. If your table frets whenever you throw 8 creatures of random size on the table, and then start rolling initiative, and then you take 8 additional turns every round, and maybe block your ally movement, or you create other inconveniences that reduce the fun of the other players and the DM, well, this spell just isn't going to disrupt anything near that. You know, assuming you're playing D&D for fun. So there are reasons. There's 6 of them. Though ultimately, I absolutely agree that overall, this is less powerful than conjure animals. And as a 3rd level spell, I think it's green. I think it's good. I think it's better overall than Summon Beast if you're using a 3rd level slot. But it's also a higher base level spell. So if you have Summon Beast and you have Summon Fae, and you're going to use a 3rd level slot, you're better off doing the Summon Fae than upcasting Summon Beast. If you are playing a Druid and you want to use summoning, this is still a good option. Our next spell is Tidal Wave. We cast this using our action, and we choose an area within 120 feet where any creatures in a 30-foot long, 10-foot wide, and 10-foot tall area make a dexterity saving throw. On a failed save, they take 48 bludgeoning damage and they're knocked prone. On a successful save, they take half the damage and they aren't knocked prone. As well, any flames in the area are extinguished. So this is just a blast with a potential prone on a failed save. The name Tidal Wave makes me expect a massive effect, but that's not what you get, not even close. 30 feet long, 10 feet wide, that is 12 squares. A fireball is 64 squares for comparison. This is actually really tiny. I've seen way bigger waves on Deadliest Catch. And that is a problem because the damage here is 18 on average, less than Erupting Earth. But you know what? It's even a smaller area than the small area Erupting Earth. You aren't just getting enough creatures with this to make it worthwhile. This isn't good. If this spell was actually big, like the name Tidal Wave would suggest, then it might be good, but this isn't big. This is tiny. This should be called Average Wave at the Beach. It is red. Wall of Water is our next spell. Ooh, Wall of Water. So maybe this one is big. Nope. 30 feet long, 10 feet high, 1 inch thick. This one isn't big either. Though you can make a ringed wall 20 feet in diameter, which is actually, and strangely, a lot bigger than the straight wall. I have no idea why. Anyways, you create the effect within 60 feet using your action, and it lasts up to 10 minutes using your concentration. So first off, this isn't a wall. You can walk through this, and it doesn't even slow you down. What it does do is cause ranged weapon attacks disadvantage, which we could do with warding wind with a lower level slot. We can have fire damage, which potentially could be useful. And spells that deal cold damage, that pass through it, can freeze it, which actually does create a wall technically. So, as a straight range defense, this is just worse than warding wind. As fire defense, it's okay if you're expecting enough fire ranged attacks to make it worth a 3rd level spell, though since this doesn't block movement, the red dragon can still just walk through this and then breathe on you, so I'm not even sure it's all that good for that. Where I do think there is some potential value here is with the freezing. If you were to, say, encircle some enemies with this, and then maybe on the next turn, the next caster cast a cone of cold or something, and then that froze it solid, then you have a poor man's wall spell. On its own, this would be red, but if you did get that kind of coordination, there are some ways you can make this a decent 3rd level battlefield control spell. So this is orange. The circumstances I'm talking about with the orange being a coordinated effort with another spellcaster capable of freezing the wall. Water breathing is up next. You cast this as an action. Sorry, nix that. You are almost always casting this as a ritual at the beginning of the day. Maybe if it gets dispelled and you happen to be in the water or you're on your way there soon, then maybe as an action in that case, but almost always as a ritual. You pick 10 willing creatures within 30 feet and they gain the ability to breathe underwater for 24 hours. So this is useful utility as a mass buff because, like I said, you just cast it at the beginning of the day as a ritual, and then it lasts all day, and then the next day you do it again. It never uses your spell slot, and the whole party and their pets can all breathe water. Maybe you need it, maybe you don't, but it's there, and you didn't expend a resource. So this is pretty good. You have to fit it in your preparations, though, so it can be a tight squeeze, but if you can fit it, just cast it as a ritual every day, even if you don't expect to need it, because who knows? With a full day duration and no concentration, it's just a good investment. This is green because it's cheap to cast and it does come up. Water Walk is our next spell. The use here is actually fairly similar to water breathing, and I would never prepare both of them. You just don't have room on your preparation list. Like water breathing, this is a ritual, and you pick 10 willing creatures, but instead of being able to breathe underwater, they're able to walk over it. In fact, should they become submerged during the spell's duration, they automatically rise to the surface at a range of 60 feet per round. So to some degree, you can use these spells the same way. Need to cross a lake? Well, you can walk over it, or you can walk under it. There are some important differences, though. The first is that this spell lets you walk over any liquid surface. And apparently, the designers think snow is a liquid, since they specifically list it as an example of a liquid you can use this spell to walk over. So we'll take it. I guess even if you have a mile of snow above you, if you cast this, I guess you rise up through the snow to the top? I guess so. I mean, that's how it's written. Mud, acid, quicksand, and lava are also specifically listed. So presumably if you find yourself in the area of a transmute rock spell, you could just use this and walk across unhindered. The other thing to note here is the duration is much smaller, 1 hour. Now potentially you could stop every 50 minutes to cast this again, but not if you're concentrating on something else, since any ritual requires concentration for the casting time, and also you may not have that 10 minutes every 50 minutes. I mean, maybe you will, maybe you won't. So in some cases, this is better than breathe water, and in some cases it's worse. But again, there is enough overlap, I wouldn't prepare both. But you know what? They're both good spells, largely because of the ritual casting, so green here too. And our final 3rd level spell is Wind Wall. You choose 120 feet, use your action, and a wall of wind, and I use the term wall really loosely, rises up for 1 minute using your concentration. The wall is 50 feet long and 15 feet high, and you can shape it however you like, as long as it's one continuous path. Creatures in the effect, and I'm not going to call it a wall anymore, creatures in the effect, when the spell is cast, make a strength saving throw. If they fail, they take 3d8 bludgeoning damage, and half if they succeed. and then the wind throws them 30 feet in a random direction and they fall prone. Just kidding. They don't move at all. They just take the nominal damage of this spell. Fog, smoke, or gases can't pass through the effect, so there's that, I guess. And small or smaller flying creatures can't either, so if you're fighting a bunch of birds, then this could be okay. There is one valid use for this that might come up. It blocks arrows. Doesn't block big stuff like giant throwing rocks, but enemy arrows are blocked. So that could be useful some of the time. So, I mean, I was hard on this spell. I guess I just don't like calling a spell a wall when it's more of a curtain. But the spell Wind Curtain is occasionally good if we are blocking enemy archers, and for that reason, it's orange. And that's our list. Obviously, conjure animals is really good, but it really isn't your only option. Sleet Storm, Plant Growth, Summon Fae. The Druid has a number of really good combat spell options to choose from at this level. Once again, the strength here is battlefield control and summoning, and Druids just level after level are standouts among casters at both. Building a decent preparation list without conjure animals at level 5, piece of cake. Aura Vitality and Revivify are beefing up our healing options. We have strong utility options. The difficulty here, like previous levels, won't be finding spells to fill your preparations, but narrowing your options to fit those preparations. So that's it for 3rd level spells. Next week we're going to be looking at 4th level Druid spell options, and once again, there are some amazing options. Hope you'll join me for that. Otherwise, until next time, I'm going to sit back, relax, and have some fun. D&D's for everyone. Thanks everybody, and I'll talk to you soon.